Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to explore something that I think a lot of people can relate to but don't always have the language for. We're going to talk about relational trauma and how it can impact us in ways we don't even realize.
It can be pretty subtle, right? Like, you know something's off, but you just can't quite put your finger on it.
Exactly. And that's where the work of Juha Klaavu comes in.
Ah, yes, Glavu.
He's a Jungian psychoanalyst, and we've got a couple excerpts from his work that really break down how this whole relational trauma thing works on like an unconscious level.
Oh, I love Klavu. He's got such a fascinating perspective.
Yeah.
What he really emphasizes is that the more unconscious the trauma is, the stronger of a grip it can have on us. It's like it's operating behind the scenes, shaping our choices and our reactions without us even knowing.
Okay, so it's like we're puppets and we don't even see the strings. That's kind of freaky.
Yeah, in a way. You ever feel like you keep running into the same problems in your relationships over and over again? Like maybe you keep attracting the same kind of partner or you always end up in the same kind of conflict?
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Klavu calls that repetition compulsion. We'll get into that a bit later, but for now, I want to talk about another one of his analogies that I find really helpful. He talks about these colored glasses that we develop as a result of relational trauma.
Colored glasses. Okay.
Yeah. So think about it this way. Imagine wearing a pair of glasses with rose-colored lenses. Everything you look at would appear rosy, right? Even if it wasn't actually rosy in reality.
Oh, okay, I'm following you.
Well, relational trauma can work in a similar way. Let's say you had a really critical parent growing up. You were constantly told you weren't good enough.
Oof, I know a few people like that.
Right. So that experience can create a lens through which you view the world. As an adult, you might be hypersensitive to any kind of feedback, even if it's constructive or well-intentioned.
Oh, so even if someone is trying to be helpful, it can feel like a personal attack because of those colored glasses.
Exactly. Klavu talks about a client of his. She always felt overlooked as a kid, like her needs were never a priority. Now at work, she's convinced that her colleagues are intentionally excluding her from projects.
Oh no.
Yeah. In reality, her colleagues are just busy, but her colored glasses make it impossible to see the situation objectively.
I can see how that would lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it can create so much conflict because you're not actually responding to what's happening in the present. You're reacting to those old wounds. It's like your past is bleeding into your present.
Wow, that's actually a really good way to put it. And it makes you wonder how often we're doing that without even realizing it.
All the time,
Sure.
probably. And it's not always as dramatic as feeling attacked or excluded. Sometimes it's more subtle, like just feeling this underlying sense of anxiety or unease in certain situations.
Hmm. I think we've all been there. But this reminds me, you mentioned repetition compulsion earlier. And I have to admit, that sounds a bit like, well, a bit like we're doomed to keep making the same mistakes forever. But I'm hoping there's more to it than that.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot more to it than that. And you're right, the name sounds kind of ominous, but Klavu actually sees repetition compulsion as a sign that we're trying to heal. It's like we're unconsciously drawn to situations that resemble our past traumas, almost like we're trying to work through those old wounds.
Okay, so it's not that we're trying to recreate the pain, but more like we're trying to resolve something.
Exactly. So let's say you had a parent who was emotionally unavailable growing up. A part of you is still longing for that connection that you missed out on.
Makes sense.
So you might unconsciously seek out partners who are also emotionally unavailable. It's like you're trying to get it right this time to finally experience that secure, loving bond that you craved as a child.
Oh, wow. So like, without even realizing it, we could be setting ourselves up to relive those old hurts.
It can definitely feel that way sometimes. Klavu had a client who kept choosing partners who were critical and dismissive. She thought she was breaking the pattern from her childhood, because her dad was like that, but she was actually just recreating it.
That's so interesting. I mean, it really makes you think about the choices we make in relationships. But it also makes me wonder, are we both playing a part in this? If
Mhm.
we're drawing these people into our lives, are they also drawn to us for similar reasons?
You're asking all the right questions. It's this complex dance, isn't it? And yeah, it's very likely that both people in a relationship are bringing their own unconscious patterns to the table, their own colored glasses, their own unresolved traumas. Some people call this the chaotic pairs dynamic, and it can be really hard to break free from.
Oh, I bet. This is some heavy stuff. So I'm guessing Klavu has some thoughts on how we can start to untangle ourselves from all of this.
He does, and it might surprise you to hear that he's actually really optimistic about our ability to heal and grow. But before we get into that, I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect. Have you noticed any recurring themes in your own relationships? Any patterns that keep popping up no matter how hard you try to change them?
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, right? But just being aware of these patterns is the first step. Like it's half the battle.
Okay, so we've kind of like stared into the abyss of our own relational trauma. What do we do now? How do we actually start to break free from these unconscious
Well,
patterns?
Claudio is a big believer in the power of therapy. And honestly, as a therapist myself, I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, therapy makes sense. But I think a lot of people worry that it's just going to be all about dredging up painful memories and, wallowing in the past.
That's a really common fear. But good therapy isn't about dwelling on the past. It's about understanding how those past experiences are impacting you in the present. And then, figuring out how to heal so you can actually move on. So it's not about changing the past, but changing how we relate to it.
Exactly. It's about shifting your perspective and learning to see those old patterns with compassion and understanding. And ultimately, the goal is to develop healthier ways of relating to yourself and to others.
I get that. But what about people who aren't ready for therapy or who don't have access to it? Are there things they can do on their own?
Definitely. Klaavu talks about this idea of gradually increasing your awareness. He compares it to learning to walk.
Oh, okay.
You're going to stumble, you're going to fall. But with practice, you start to find your balance and you build that confidence. And it's the same with relational trauma, right? Just becoming aware of when you're slipping into those old patterns is huge. It
Hmm.
gives you a chance to kind of hit the pause button and choose a different path.
So instead of just reacting automatically, we can create space for a more conscious response.
That's the idea. That space, that pause, that's where the magic happens. That's where you can start to question those old beliefs and those automatic reactions. Ask yourself, is this really about what's happening right now? Or am I seeing this through my colored glasses? Am I reacting based on past hurt? Or am I responding to the present situation?
I love that, asking those questions. But to be honest, sometimes even when I know what's going on, I still get sucked in. Like my emotions take over.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. Klavu talks about this tension between our intellect and our emotions, and it can be one of the most frustrating parts of healing. You might understand intellectually what's happening, but your emotional reactions are just, totally different.
It's like a battle between head and heart, and the heart usually wins.
It totally does. And it's important to be patient with yourself. Healing isn't linear. There are going to be ups and downs, and you're going to have moments where you feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and then boom, 1 step back. And yeah, it's totally normal to feel frustrated or even angry when that happens.
So, we shouldn't beat ourselves up for having those big feelings. It's okay to feel them.
More than okay. Klabu says those emotions, they're valuable. They're trying to tell you something. So instead of judging yourself, try to get curious. Like, what's this emotion trying to tell me? What need is it pointing to? You might discover that, maybe your anger is actually masking a deep sense of hurt or a fear of being abandoned. And once you understand the root of that emotion, you can start to address it in a healthier way.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It reminds me of something else Klavu talked about, mirroring. How important it is to have that in childhood. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Mirroring is huge, especially when we're kids. It's how we develop a sense of self. It's like, when a parent or caregiver mirrors us, they're reflecting back who we are. They're showing us that we matter, that we're worthy of love and attention.
So, their loving gaze, their attuned responses, all of that helps us see ourselves as valuable.
Exactly. But when that mirroring is missing or distorted, it can really mess with our sense of self. Like imagine a child who's constantly being criticized or told they're not good enough. Those messages get internalized, and they can shape how that child sees themselves for years and years.
And so it's like those early experiences can create the very colored glasses we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why it's so important for parents and caregivers to be mindful of the messages they're sending, both verbally and non-verbally. But, even if you didn't have the most supportive upbringing, it's never too late to heal those wounds. You can actually learn to give yourself that love and acceptance that you maybe missed out on as a kid.
Wait, so you're saying we can actually learn to mirror ourselves?
You totally can. It starts with awareness. Like pay attention to that inner critic, that voice that's always telling you you're not good enough or you're not doing enough. Notice when it pops up and then just gently challenge those thoughts.
So it's about being more mindful of our self-talk and, being kinder to ourselves.
You got it. You could even practice looking in the mirror and saying positive affirmations. It might feel a little awkward at first, but over time it can really make a difference.
I love that. It's like we're becoming our own loving parents.
I love that analogy. And remember, this is a journey. There are going to be ups and downs, moments of clarity, and moments of like, what am I doing? But the more you move towards awareness and self-compassion, the closer you'll get to that sense of freedom that Klaavu talks about.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into relational trauma and all its hidden workings. This has been a pretty intense conversation.
Yeah, it's deep stuff for sure. But I think it's so important to talk about this because it's something that affects so many of us.
I agree. And, going back to Klaavu's work, one of the things that stuck with me is this idea that those unconscious mechanisms, the ones that keep us repeating the same patterns over and over, they're not something to be ashamed of. They're actually a sign that we want to heal.
Right, like deep down, we're yearning for connection, for wholeness. But sometimes we go about it in ways that, well, that don't really serve us.
And that's where those colored glasses come in, those distorted perceptions that keep us from seeing things clearly.
And the repetition compulsion that keeps us stuck in those familiar but often painful dynamics.
Oh, it can be so frustrating.
Mhm.
But Klaavu also emphasizes that we're not doomed to repeat those patterns forever. There's so much hope for healing and transformation.
Absolutely. And he talks about therapy as being a powerful tool for that transformation. He compares it to learning to walk. It's not always easy. There will be stumbles, setbacks, but eventually you find your balance. You gain that confidence.
I love that analogy. And, it makes sense because therapy provides a safe space to explore those deep-seated patterns, to understand where they come from, and to develop healthier ways of coping.
Yeah, it's like having a guide to help you navigate those tricky parts of yourself. And over time, you start to build a more loving and compassionate relationship with yourself.
Speaking of tricky parts, I keep thinking about that tension that Klaavu talks about, that tension between our intellect and our emotions. Like, we might understand intellectually what's going on, but our emotional reactions can be a whole different story.
Oh, tell me about it. I think we've all been there, right? Where our head is saying one thing, but our heart is doing another. It can be so disorienting.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we learn to honor both our intellect and our emotions in the healing process?
Well, Clavi suggests that we approach our emotions with curiosity and compassion. Instead of judging them or trying to push them away, we try to understand what they're trying to tell us.
So it's about listening to our emotions with an open heart, even when they're difficult or uncomfortable.
Exactly. Because even those messy, painful emotions, they hold valuable information. They're like signposts pointing us towards the areas that need our attention.
It's like they're trying to guide us back to ourselves, to those parts of us that need healing. And speaking of healing, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier. Shadow work. It's such a powerful concept, and I'm curious to hear more about how it relates to relational trauma.
Shadow work is all about those hidden parts of ourselves, the ones we'd rather not acknowledge. The anger, the jealousy, the fear, all the stuff we try to keep buried. And it's about bringing those parts into the light.
Okay, but that sounds kind of scary. Like, what if we open up that Pandora's box and all these dark, messy things come pouring out?
It's understandable to feel that way, but here's the thing. Those shadow parts, they're already there, whether we acknowledge them or not. And the more we try to suppress them, the more power they have over us.
So it's better to face them head on than to let them control us from the shadows.
Exactly. Shadow work is about ending that internal battle, making peace with all parts of ourselves, the light and the dark.
So how do we actually do this shadow work? Where do we even begin?
One of the most powerful tools is journaling. Just set aside some time each day to write freely about whatever is coming up for you, without judging or censoring yourself. Let it all out on the page.
So it's about creating a safe space to be honest with ourselves, even if it's messy or painful.
You got it. You can also explore guided meditations or visualizations designed for shadow work. They can help you access and process those deeper emotions.
This is fascinating. It's like we're peeling back the layers of ourselves and discovering these hidden treasures.
And the more we explore our shadows, the more whole and integrated we become.
I'm really starting to see the connections between all these ideas, the colored glasses, the repetition compulsion, the shadow work. It's all about becoming more aware of those unconscious patterns so we can make conscious choices.
You nailed it. And yeah, it's a journey. And it takes courage and compassion. But the rewards are so worth it.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
Yeah,
It's always so rewarding to talk about this stuff.
And to our listeners out there, we hope you found this deep dive insightful and maybe even a little bit empowering.
Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep trusting in your own ability to heal and grow.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the unconscious mechanisms of relational trauma. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of human experience.